Hello boys and girls, welcome to my channel. I'm for Classic and welcome to BenchART. So another day, another test for the RX6700 XT, just to have an idea how it runs. In this case we have in here Spider-Man 2, which is, well, not the best case scenario for me, given that I'm running a Ryzen 5 3600X and this game is very CPU intensive. So let's start with the median settings. The only change that I did in this, I did raise the texture quality to high and the anisotropic filtering to 16 because we have enough VRAM. I'm not using ray tracing at all, alright? And yeah, so shadow quality is set to low by default because of the presets, and SSAU and screen space reflections are set to low. So the median preset of this game kind of defaults to the low what it is graphical, but what it is mostly CPU demandingness, it is set to median settings apparently. This game it is very CPU bound, and I think my system it is actually struggling. When I mean my system, I mean my CPU, my memory, everything aside from the GPU. It is actually struggling to have a sustainable experience in here. Despite the frame rate, it is above 60. The 1% lows are below of that. I believe this is related with the traversal, and there is another thing that I think it's a point of pain that I'm having in here is that Spider-Man 2 does support direct storage, alright? And direct storage, it is primarily built in to run through the GPU. But to run direct storage through the GPU, you need to have an NVMe or an M2 SSD, which I don't have. My SSDs are SATA, so they are still the old type of SSDs. And basically directed storage, it is blocked on the CPU. Also, consoles like PS5 does use, they don't use direct storage, but they do use something similar to that, and I believe it does run on a GPU or a coprocessor specific for that. And so I do believe that my CPU is struggling more than most of the people because I don't have an NVMe SSD, and so direct storage is not working on the GPU, and it's putting an extra volt on the CPU because of that same reason. But the thing is, there are also many people out there complaining about direct storage on the GPU, that it is stealing a lot of frames from the people and causing a lot of inconsistencies and stutters and crashes because it is running on the GPU and people would prefer to run on the CPU. So to be honest, I'm not sure what it is better. What I do know is that my CPU is suffering in here to provide the frame rates that this game deserves, with the consistency that this game deserves. And despite I'm having good frame rates over here, like you see, like 80s and 70s and 90s, the 1% lows are actually at 50 frames per second, which is not a big issue. It's not just as consistent as I would love, but Spider-Man 2 is getting hammered as being a bad port, so I think I should be glad to be running the game like this. So now let's try other settings in here. So this time around I will just change the game to the high settings. Keep in mind that both medium and high settings I was using XeSS in its quality mode, and what it did change with the high preset is that the shadow quality raised from low to the high settings. But what is most noticeable for me is that all the options like level of details, traffic density, pedestrian quantity, it is raised to high. So most of these settings are above all CPU settings, alright? They are not GPU. They do affect, of course, the GPU performance. They're also very painful to the CPU too in that sense. So what really happens to me is that if I was already complaining about the CPU performance, raising this to the high settings, it is actually making things worse. I do still think that I'm bottlenecked on the RX 6700 XT, pushing the game too high. Instead of putting more load on the GPU, I'm feeling that I did put more load on the CPU, so I'm still bottlenecked. Performance it is still mostly above 60 in my opinion, but the inconsistencies are actually seems to be slightly worse. So it's really up to you what you decide to use. So I saw 59 frames in there, 56, 54. So it's definitely less consistent in my opinion. Keep in mind that I'm recording and this also affects the frame rates, alright? So I think probably the best option to do is for you to select the high presets, alright? But decrease stuff like level of details, traffic density, and pedestrians to median. I think that probably should help with the CPU if you are sporting a Ryzen 5 3600X. Although if you have a much better CPU than I do have, probably you can play at high settings with XeSS on its quality mode or FSR quality or iGTI, whatever you feel that it's better for you, because in performance sense they are all the same. You just need to choose what you like the most, and for this game I decided to go with XeSS, and that's about it. I think that the GPU can deliver an experience truly above 60. It's really just the CPU that it's holding its back. Now I will use the same high settings, but I decided to disable any upscaling. Alright, this should put more load into the GPU only, because we are rendering the game at a higher resolution in here. So we are natively now running at 1080p with TAA, and I still do think we are bottlenecked. GPU usage remains mostly the same, but I can see the GPU now getting to 98, 97, so it did raise a little bit in that sense, and the performance level seems to be mostly the same. I think it's slightly worse, but mostly the same as the high settings without any upscaling. Alright. It's overall again above 60. There are a drop here and there. The 1% lows are worse. It seems like the frame times are a little bit more variable, which in the past we were having about 50. Right now it's 39, so I'm not really sure why. But regarding frame rates, I think it's mostly the same. As you can see near the bridge, it is around 55, 56. Yeah, it's slightly worse. I think it's slightly worse, like 5 to 8 frames per second compared to the high settings with Intel XeSS. Alright, so that's the way that I feel. So I will cut this short in here maybe, and I will jump up to my last settings with the high settings, because I think it will be interesting. So last settings for 1080p, I won't be trying the game on ultra or very high because the performance is not great. But instead, I decided that on the high settings, I wanted to enable something that it is available on PS5 on all the presets. So whatever, if you go with the performance mode or quality mode or whatever on the PS5, you will have ray tracing. And so that's essentially what I've done. I did enable ray tracing on the game. And well, we all know that the AMD first gen of ray tracing generation is not great, and so we can see that in here. So we are not able to get 60 frames per second anymore like this, although we are having ray tracing. What really pisses me off a little bit is that PS5 can run ray tracing, and what I do think that something like medium or high settings with ray tracing, and we aren't really able to have 60 frames per second with those same settings. So I know that the PS5 have their own set of optimizations. Ray tracing is much better optimized than on PC. AMD is either not great too with the ray tracing, but it's not only that. PS5 also can run this game at 60 frames per second with no issues. And according to many tests that I've seen online, even without ray tracing, the Ryzen 5 3600X in more dense areas of the city, it can also not hold 60 frames per second, even without ray tracing. So with ray tracing also penalizes a lot the CPU, so it is to be expected that the experience is even worse. So this is what we get with the ports from PlayStation 5. I do understand that these games are designed and tailored for that specific system, although people do expect that this type of ports does run with PS5 equivalent settings and PS5 similar PCs, but honestly it's not really the case. We are actually losing a lot of stuff compared to the PS5, but still, with or without ray tracing, I do think that the game runs pretty well. It's just that if you want to play with ray tracing, you probably need to consider like a 30 frames per second cap or a 40 frames per second cap or something like that. And without ray tracing, I think we can run at 60, but there might be some pain moments where it will drop due to people density outside or just some inconsistencies in frame times that can throw your game to under than 60 frames per second. Now let's move on to 1440p and try to understand what's the best settings. So basically it's 1440p median settings with Intel XeSS on its quality mode. Oh my god, I was able to bug the game. Oh, holy shit, amazing. Okay, and so by using 1440p with Intel XeSS in its quality mode and median settings, I can clearly see that we are still bottlenecked even with these settings, but we are getting an experience above 60. As usual, the 1% lows are, well, weird and below 60, but the core gameplay, it is above 60 frames per second. So I think it's my recommended setting in case you want to enjoy the game at 1440p. Just go with median settings, use Intel XeSS and call it a day. Or you can even try what I did suggest with the 1080p, which is put the game on high but do decrease what it is, the CPU bound settings, so like the level of details, the traffic density, the pedestrian density, reduce those settings. But still, I'm not really sure if you can maintain a good performance like that, but at least as I can see, 1440p median settings, Intel XeSS on its quality mode, so essentially we are upscaling what I do believe from 900p. Well, I'm not really sure about that, since Intel XeSS does use a lower resolution though, but look at this, it is always above 60, so yeah, I do recommend this setting, that's for sure, if you do play at 1440p. Now let's do a quick look at the other 1440p settings, just to be more quicker. So as for these new free settings, basically 1440p high with XeSS seems like a good candidate for a FreeSync or a variable refresh rate user, since the frame rate seems to be pretty much in between 50 to 60 or sometimes even above 60. For 1440p high settings, it doesn't even reach 60 frames per second, and 1440p high with ray tracing, it seems to be holding slightly above 30, and there was some drops in there sometimes below than 30, but what really makes me think that it's a complicated setting to use is really the frame times. The 1% lows are really bad at 18, so it doesn't seem very consistent. So I would use 1440p high settings with XeSS in its quality mode if I had a variable refresh rate screen. As for 1440p high, I would probably use, if I could walk to 30 frames per second or 40 frames per second, and if you had a kind of 120 Hz screen or something like that, seems like a viable option. But definitely 1440p high with ray tracing on high is it doesn't seem like a good option in my opinion. So let's just jump to 4K, shall we? So for 4K, essentially I will be starting with median preset with XeSS on its balanced mode. So I'm really a lover of these median settings, it seems. And let's check it out how it runs, and apparently it's running above 60 with a drop here and there to 50s, to 52. So just like 1440p median settings with XeSS in quality mode, this runs mostly the same, but instead it's 4K with XeSS in its balanced mode. It seems to run slightly worse, but above all, the experience seems to be above than 50 frames per second. Sometimes it might drop a little bit further. What really concerns me is it is again the frame times. Frame times are very consistent. It's like something is happening in there. I'm not really sure what. But apart from that, a FreeSync user should have a great experience, or a variable refresh rate user can have a great experience in here. But locking to 60, it is out of the question, unless you probably decrease the XeSS to performance mode, or even try to use low settings. But low settings, I think it's a little bit too far. I would prefer to probably play with this variable refresh rate, I mean variable frame rate, or probably just drop even lower the internal resolution, because after all we are at 4K, so why not? Um, I would probably prefer to decrease the resolution of the upscaler. But that's just my opinion. It's really up to you to decide. But yeah, surprisingly great in that sense. So let's move on to 4K high settings. And just to finish off the Spider-Man 2 and all these tests with the RX 6700 XT, I'm just trying Spider-Man with high settings and XeSS on its quality mode. So essentially, we are upscaling from 1440p to 4K, and this seems like a very good performance if you want to play at 30 frames per second locked, aside from, again, those weird issues with the frame times. Frame times are all over the place in here, and the 1% lows are at 23. I'm not really sure, again, what it is causing this, but yeah, I would probably try to reduce the CPU bound settings again. Level of details, pedestrian, traffic, you know, I already mentioned them a lot of times in this video, to median, but keep the rest on high and probably lock the game at 30 frames per second to have a console-like experience. I haven't tried without resolution scaling or with ray tracing, but performance was really bad. So that's why I'm not going to cover those settings at 4K. So with this, I think that's all that I want to talk about Spider-Man 2 on the RX 6700 XT. It's disappointing that we can't match the PS5, but at least, in my opinion, we have a very good experience with the game. I think the game runs okay, aside from my CPU, that it doesn't seem to be able to, you know, to all the 60 frames per second lock, or everything seems a little bit inconsistent. So if you have a better CPU, possibly your experience will be better, as well as your frame times. So I think that's all, guys. Thank you much for watching until now, and I do expect to see you soon in another video. Goodbye.